Welcome, Sarah Bell, to the next episode of the Geospatial Index. I'm very pleased to have met you on Bluesky, where you were talking about, of all things, a tutorial about shaded relief. So absolutely, this podcast is about cartography. It's about time we addressed it. So really happy to have you on, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's get the formalities out of the way. I'll see if I can nail this first time. I understand you're a principal product engineer for a product called ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud. Please explain briefly.
Sure, yeah. So ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud, or what we call Maps for Adobe for short, it is a plugin that Esri's created that works in Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, but it's mainly in Adobe Illustrator, and it connects ArcGIS Cloud to the Adobe Creative Cloud. So you can make maps directly inside Adobe Illustrator with this tool, or you can also export a map from ArcGIS Pro as an AIX file. That stands for Adobe Interchange Exchange file. And Maps for Adobe will unpackage and process that file so that it's all neatly organized and ready to design in Adobe Illustrator.
That sounds really cool. It seems like there's a few plugins that you guys maintain. For example, I'm familiar with and quite often use the ArcGIS for AutoCAD plugin.
Yes, this is true. There's a bunch of ArcGIS 4 and then another product, and
Insert
it will
software.
connect. It'll sort of like exactly, it'll mapify or bring the world of mapping to that product in a way that, so if you have, a certain license level at Esri, you'll be able to create maps or open your maps or enhance your maps within whatever product that plugin works.
I love this concept of mapify. This is a terrible joke, but I am now going to try to put that in my CV somewhere.
Yes, I don't even, yeah. Did I say that? I guess I must have.
I want to be known as someone who mapifies things. That's awesome.
That's funny.
Okay, cool. Well, we've got the plug, I guess, out of the way. It does sound like a really useful plugin. I'm interested to investigate that myself. So I guess the point of this episode is about cartography and how to do a hillshade. Let's start with the basics. What on earth is a hillshade?
Oh man, so what is a hillshade? Let me take a step back and think about what it is myself. So basically, it is the difference between light and dark that gives you the illumination or the illustration of topography. So I have this. I'm sure. I don't know if you're looking at my screen right now.
Yeah, we can see step one here.
But yeah, essentially, hillshade is the shade that a hill makes in short. A lot of people refer to it also as shaded relief, relief being the difference in elevation. So, yeah.
Is it kind of the point that there's the sun or a light source that somehow creates the shade, and that in turn illuminates changes in terrain or the topography?
This is true, yes. I guess in the absence of light, there would be no shade. So that is a consideration when you're making your own shaded relief or hill shade in a mapping software is you choose where the artificial sun would be, and as well as, how high the sun is. And the most common place that we put that is in the upper left so in most maps, if north is the top of your map, that would be the northwest of your map would be where the sun angle is hitting from, just like in these photos. And so the brighter spots would be the north aspect.
Okay, that's interesting to hear that convention.
Yeah, and there's a reason for it. I'm going to flip through. I don't know. Yeah, so here's the reason for that. So here is a picture. These are identical pictures of Mount St. Helens here in Washington State where I live. And the one on the left, north, is at the bottom. So it's been rotated. And it looks like you know, initially, at least to my eyes and a lot of people's eyes, it looks like it's an impression or a dimple in the earth rather than a volcano that's popping out of the earth. And nothing's been changed other than this image on the right has been rotated. The sun angle didn't change. So now that it's been rotated, the sun angle is at the lower right of the image. And the reason why this gives us that illusion is that it's sinking into the earth rather than rising above the earth is because of how we see light in our daily lives. We're used to the light coming from the top. So when we add light to shaded relief in a computer program, or even when we're drawing it, it's always at the top to prevent this sort of illusion, where the high parts are sinking into the earth. It's always at the top, and it's usually at the upper left.
That's fascinating. That's exploring how the mind works, and yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's and here's a so I did it's called there's a nice paper that I put a hyperlink to in this tutorial I wrote. So that goes into it more scientifically, a lot more scientifically than I just described it.
So I guess I'm interested in why you chose to create this tutorial. Is it just that is it how much you love doing cartography, or was there a question that regularly came up at work or something?
So the whole reason I decided to start drawing, hillshade with pencil was that I was getting into a lot of digital mapping. I had been at my job, I started in 2013 at Esri, and it got me more and more into, I was already digital mapping, but it got me further and further away from drawing and exploring the world artistically with non-digital media. And I wanted to sort of grow in my cartography skills while also pursuing, my drawing skills. So I decided to figure out if I could draw shaded relief. So I just started with just drawing shapes, like kind of what you see here. And then I was like, okay, what are the principles that I'm doing to these simple geometric shapes? And how can I apply those principles to shaded relief? So I just sort of was doing that at home, not on work hours or anything, just doing it for myself. And I'm a member of an organization. I'm also on the board of an organization called the North American Cartographic Association. And there's an annual conference every year. And this year it's in Tacoma, Washington, 2024 in October. I highly recommend everybody who can go to go. But I decided to I do. It's just really fun. It's super fun. If you're into cartography, it's a great way to just meet cartographers, find out what they're doing. Everybody's doing such creative things, whether if they're freelance or they're academics or they're working for a company. So it's just really fun to see what's going on in the spatial world, it's particularly cartography perspective.
I should also say, sorry to butt in, but this is also useful for me because the point of reaching out to all these people doing GIS in the US is to collect these organizations to build my network. And as a result of my chat last week with Jamie Dennis, I've signed up with Eureka, and I've continued on with my GISP application. So it sounds like there's another organization I'll be joining.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is a great organization as well. That's awesome. That's great. Yes, and then yes, NACIS is what the acronym, we just call it NACIS for short. But it is so wonderful, and it's just like, how in the world are you going to connect with the most excited cartographers other than going to the association's meetings? And yeah, it's just great. So but I wanted to present to them this new thing that I found. I didn't find it. People have been drawing hillshade for a very long time, but I wanted to share with them how they could do this too. And one thing that I don't know how you work, but how I work sometimes is I just kind of like stumble into the flow of things, And then if someone says, oh, hey, how did you do that? I'll have to go back and deconstruct how I did it. So writing this tutorial and doing the presentation at NACIS and other places allowed me to sort of, okay, what am I really doing here? Deconstruct the steps and share them with other people. And we actually, let's go back to the first page of this tutorial. This is a picture of that NACIS.
This is the workshop.
Yeah, we had a workshop. So it was
Ah.
wonderful. All of these people showed up. We did watercolor and we did the Hillshade, and then I shared it online, and some people even would read it online and would share their work like on Twitter or whatever social media they're using. And it was just really fun to see how people, because everybody has their own unique style. So there's one cartographer who is I believe he's in Idaho. His name is Lee France. He did this amazing, because I even did I went on and did a color version.
Yeah.
So adding color. I still need to format this after I've, but he did this wonderful color version of doing Hillshade with color pencils.
Okay, so you've talked about black and white versions and colored hillshade or shaded relief. I haven't come across that myself. So my inevitable next sort of question or a parallel for me here is Stamen's watercolor maps and just generally the amazing stylish base maps that Stamen have produced. I mean, it's making me think, like a real sign of your dedication as a cartographer or a GIS person, I'll say, generally is to, hand create the hillshade for whatever area of interest you're mapping. I don't know, it's sort of opened up a new possibility for me to sort of make a stamp on a project, but of course it depends how much artistic license you're allowed on a particular project.
Right. Yes. I will say that, if your project does allow for it, you'll find that, at least I find that it's very meditative to sort of dig into this topography that you're mapping in such an intimate way versus, and it can be that way when you're doing it digitally, but when you're drawing and you're listening to music and you're really considering every valley in your topography, how does the light hit this? Or how would it if the light were at this angle? It's just really fun, and you have these sort of memories associated with your map that you don't when you're doing it digitally.
I agree. I mean, basically, the word that applies to this to me is that you're caused to study in detail the terrain. And I definitely wouldn't be doing that if I was just bringing in the web service from Esri. Sorry.
That's true. I mean, it's true. Or even if you're taking a DEM and you're just applying the then values that you always do, it's sort of, you're just going through the motions rather than really getting to know the terrain.
Yeah, it also reminds me of, like, it makes me think, when was the last time I made a map by hand? And to be honest, I've never done that since high school. In year 10, every year 10 at the school that I went to, there was this thing called the surveying camp. Sounds so inspiring. But basically, there was a partnership with Flinders University, and they found an Aboriginal site that wasn't mapped adequately and sent each cohort of year 10s to a remote part of South Australia to survey and then map it. And we spent a week doing all the surveying, divided up into groups, effectively mapped a part of the site, and then all of that data was collated into a contiguous map for the rest of the term, basically by tracing it onto a translucent sheet. But so that would have been 1999. Yeah,
That's
so
really
that's the
cool.
last time I made a map by hand.
But see how memorable it was for you? That is so
Absolutely.
cool. What a fun project.
That's the map I am proudest of.
That's really cool. What a neat effort. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't I wouldn't say I'm an expert at drawing hillshade. I just enjoy it very much. I don't get to do it very often. It's a challenge to find a topography that works for this formula that I put out on the tutorial. You know, it has to be for me. It has to be very steep terrain, because if you know, I'm from a place called Minnesota where it's very flat compared to where I live now in Washington State, and the difference between, you know, the peaks and the valleys is very subtle in Minnesota. So I would love to put together a tutorial for you know, less drastic terrain or even smaller scale, because this also is challenging at smaller scales, even if it's super you know, if there's a lot of peaks and valleys that are, you know, the elevation is great and drastic, it's still really hard to capture, uh, you know, at the small scale.
Mm. So I guess it looked like you had a few steps. So I think it might be interesting just to see the framework, if you like.
Sure, let's just, you mean just go through these
Yeah,
pages
just
and discuss
understand.
it?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So this here, I just describe how the tutorial came about,
Okay.
and I describe some materials that I like to use. So that's important, I think. But I think you could do this with, if you don't have them right now and you want to just get going, and you have all you have is number 2 pencil and some blank paper. I think you'd at least be able to get started. But I say choose a reference photo as step 1, and it's for that reason that, I do say here, like, larger scale and steep terrain is a lot easier to start with, because the difference between, you know, you can just see the topography a lot, and the whole thing that makes this work is getting the difference between light and dark values. That's all it is. There's really, at its core, that's all it is. So having super steep terrain brings that out. And so if you can't find a reference photo, like let's say you don't have any mapping software, I added some that you can download right here. And yeah, so that's the first one is, and you can make a reference photo. If you are making a reference photo with your GIS software, again, steep, pretty large scale, so that you can kind of really see the difference between light and dark on your topography. And then I also say, if you find a photo online that you want to try to recreate by drawing it and it's in color, I recommend that you desaturate it in something like Photoshop, because a black or a grayscale image or a black and white image is a lot easier to see those light and dark values than with color. Um, and once you do this once or twice, or maybe even before you do it the first time, you can do this sort of with, you can make up your own terrain. If you read through these steps, you could essentially, like, do it from an imaginative terrain. It doesn't have to be real. So I also really recommend doing warm-ups,
Yeah.
just to get your brain thinking about it. I like to draw the direction of the light source, just to really force where the dark values might be, to give it a 3D look.
I love the dedication here, and I can totally feel the meditative effect. I want to do this.
Oh yeah, you should do this, and you should post it on Bluesky. I would love to see it.
Okay. All right. Let's get something started. We can have the GIS chat hashtag and the Hillshade hashtag.
Yeah, every so often this goes in waves. Like, I'll see, like, some people will be like, "Hey, I tried this tutorial, check it out," and I get all excited because it's so fun to see people's takes on it. Everybody has a different style.
Yeah.
And here, the next step is to sketch the ridgelines and valleys. So the reason why, especially the ridgelines, is because that is what is going to divide where the light falls, the peaks.
Yeah.
So here I have this image of an Imhoff drawing where I just am, like, I scribbled on top of them some digital highlights to show where some of the ridges are. And I don't always do the valleys, but sometimes I do. Every topography is all different. Mountain ranges are different in how they were formed. I'm very accustomed to drawing the North Cascades range where I live. But depending on what you're drawing, it's going to be a little different. Some are more rounded.
I feel
And
like
then, yeah,
suddenly
go
I'm
ahead.
going to become familiar with like all of these mountain ranges around, and I don't know, it's a new world.
Yeah,
I'll be able to
totally.
talk like about their names. I don't know the names of any. I mean, I'm on the plain of where London is, so there's, I think, another issue with the UK generally is that, there are no mountains really to speak of except up in Scotland, and you have to drive 10 hours to get anywhere near them. Um,
Similar to where I grew up, there were no mountains, and we would take these family trips out west, and as soon as we hit anything that resembled mountains, I got so excited. It was right about North or South Dakota, depending on which route we were taking. I would just be so excited.
uh, yeah, I'm gradually starting. I think I vaguely know where North and South Dakota are, but yeah, as the weeks
Middle
go
of the
by, I'll
country.
become okay. I did
Yeah.
have vaguely that location in mind.
Yeah, yeah. Side note, yes, they're both beautiful states. On the east side, they're still pretty flat, like Minnesota, and then as you get west, they start having a lot of topography to them. Yeah, so then I discuss whether you want to do. I trace if it's for a map that I actually want to put real data on top of the image. So take a nice scan of that image and put it in digital software, and then add labels and things, roads, whatever. Then I do trace. I trace all those ridge lines. But there's nothing wrong with freehand, and it's really fun.
Okay, so you trace so that it's somehow accurate. So when you
Right.
overlay actual surveyed data sources on it, they'll fall
Ex-
in the right place. Yep. Okay.
yes, exactly. Exactly. I would say that's the way I do it more frequently. The thing is, you need a light box, or you can see in this photo of me tracing it over my computer screen, which
Yeah.
um, is,
A
I'm
cheap light
turned up
box.
the brightness a lot.
That's awesome.
Light boxes are not easy to come by, at least not for me. Um, yeah, so the next step is, so this is very iterative. These next few steps that I'm going to share are, you do them over and over again till you're happy. So I shade in the shadows, really is what I'm calling it. But all I don't think playing a video over the screen share is going to be too wonderful. But I'm going to do it anyways and talk through it as I'm um, but if you go to cerebellmaps.com, you'll be able to see what I'm doing here. But I'm just very, very lightly with like a number 3 or maybe 4 pencil. Really, you got to feel it out. I'm shading in and the very upper parts of the dark side of the ridge lines. I'm not coloring in the entire slope, just very lightly up there at the top of the ridge, only on the dark sides.
It's like the
Um,
skeleton.
Yeah, and it doesn't look so. This is also something I want to encourage everybody, because when I first started trying this, I'm like, why am I doing this? This doesn't really look that good. But as you do these next steps iteratively over and over again, it really starts to take form. So the next step after you do shade in those shadows is to blend them. So I'm going to basically this one that I'm not going to push play on, it looks like I've already blended it. So you take your blending stump, which is just basically like a tightly round um, wad of paper shaped as a stick, and you start blending those that graphite that you just put on your page, and you blend it downslope. You sort of like tight circles, but you blend it away from the bright side of the terrain,
This is
and it
really
start.
taking me back to school because we did, I guess, like all school kids, we did charcoal drawing, and I remember those blending stumps. I remember all of those things. This is great.
Nice. Yes, it's really fun. One thing I do want to also say is I did put in this tutorial is sometimes those blending stumps, they will have a little tiny like sharp piece on it for some reason, like a wood chunk, because the paper is not super high quality, which is probably on purpose because it has to be soft. But if you scrape one of those little tiny wood chunks or slivers onto your page, it can really mess up your page.
Yeah. Good tip.
Yeah. And then yes, blending is the next. I'm gonna push play again. I don't know if so this is me blending that first time, and it's spinning, but you can see it looks a little bit more like a hillshade now, but not a lot. And another reminder to not get frustrated at this stage. It's not going to look perfect until it starts looking perfect. It's going to take some time. And every time I do this, I'm thinking to myself, this was a waste of time because it doesn't look right. And then I just keep, iteratively doing the steps of putting down graphite and then blending it, and then eventually it starts to look like a hillshade. So here's one of my first. This video shows an image of one of my very first hillshades. It is that Imhoff image we were looking at before. This was just like a little sketch pad that I had, and so I don't have a great video of it. I'm not going to push play because it's very choppy. But what the next step after you start really falling in love with the drawing that you're doing is to erase. So I do put in here the type of erasers that I like to use, but you have to sort of really get into the detail. The erasing is to get those super bright spots of your hillshade to look bright, because after you do, drawing and blending and drawing and blending, it starts to get a little muddy on the brighter sides as well, and you want to brighten them up again. So you erase to let more of the page show through.
So your point is that the shade is only half of it, and it's important to have the contrast. So you need the non-shaded areas to pop.
Exactly. And that's sort of, that's sort of the crux of all of it, is making sure the difference between light and dark is present. And that's it.
I had a question. So there was the initial step where you put down the ridges. Then you said you're using the blending stump from, I guess, the graphite that you've somehow heavily put on the page. Are you saying that it's the same grade of pencil or graphite that's used for the next step, or is that a different?
That's a great question. I don't have like the formula for which one you would want to use other than what fits your taste. So I like to use like a 4 or a 3. I find that 2 doesn't blend very well, and that can be really useful if you have, part of your terrain is very like detailed and rocky. Let's say you're doing super large scale, so you can see, boulders or something. Then you might want to keep some of that detail. So a number 2 might work perfectly. But if you're looking to blend a lot, I go with the higher value pencils.
Okay, so just because it's been literally 20 years since I did any of this stuff, a 4, is that softer than a 2?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so you're more likely to get a dark shade easily.
Yeah, you get a dark shade more easily, and it's just easier to blend. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, you can smudge it more,
right.
to use a highly technical term.
Yeah. Perfect.
Awesome. And so you've got more of a geometric hill here.
Right. Yeah. These are just some of my warm-ups. Yeah. A little bit a more reminder of how, warm-ups, or even whatever, just when you're bored, you're watching television and you want to practice, just draw geometric shapes and then add a shade to them. When I'm flying, I like to, there's here where I live, when I'm flying, I'm always flying over mountains because I live in the West Coast. And the mountains really inspire me to, on my flights, start just doodling fake hillshades. So just to keep in practice.
Wow, now there's a word here. It's on the tip of my tongue. Virtuoso. I feel like that's an applicable word here. Maybe obsessive too, but in a good way.
It can be, yes, it does. For a while, I was very obsessed with drawing hand-drawn hillshade. And, I would love to dive back into it again. Rock climbing has sort of replaced my free time at the moment. So
That's still related.
yeah, it's
I
related,
sense
right?
an affinity here for yes, relief and terrain and those sorts of things.
Yeah, it is
Awesome.
related. The drawing that I presented for the color version of this tutorial at NACES, I focused specifically on an area that was centered on one of the 50 classic climbs in North America, just to, tie in all my interests, mapping, drawing, and climbing into one map.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that was actually going to be my next question. What's your favorite bit of terrain to have done relief of? So that
Yeah,
sounds
I
like
think
it.
that's I really liked this. It's not my most perfect drawing, but this is a bit of a mountain just outside of Anchorage, Alaska that you're seeing right here. And it was the first one where I was like, I think I'm onto something here. I think this is working for me. So that one was fun, just sort of for the discovery of it all. But yeah, for the I don't know this area in Alaska, but I know very well the area that I was mentioning where it centers around that one of the 50 classics of it's called Liberty Bell Mountain. It's here in Washington State. Um, it it was really fun to be in that area as I was drawing, sort of mentally, be in that area.
Yeah. Again, I I love the meditative potential here.
I think I would not be attracted to being a cartographer at all if it did not have this creative element to it. Um, I mean, I'm attracted to the creative part as much as I am to the scientific part. So the creative part is always at the forefront of my mind, um, and I think that's why stumbling into the hand drawing aspect of it was so. It felt so. I don't want to say natural. It felt so exciting, I guess.
So, I mean, this makes me reflect on without getting too deep, but it does make me reflect really on the nature of the cartography analysis presentation, really, that I've had to do during my career. I've basically worked at engineering firms since 2011, um,
Wow.
across a number of countries now. Um, and I've always been sort of mildly frustrated that, I mean, it's understandable. You do what the client wants you to, is going to pay you to do. So no complaints there, of course. But, the map that you're showing on screen here, there has never been cause for me to put something of that degree of elegance in front of a client. And it, I feel a little bit of regret.
Oh, don't feel regret. Feel inspired because, and I get asked a lot, like by people reaching out on various platforms because the thing that people see that I work on is not what I work on at work. Um, like I said, like this map that you're seeing here, I did not make this because a client was asking for it. I made it because I had the need and desire to make it personally. Um, and so, like, I'm just going to X out of this and hopefully I don't have to push that. Okay. So, like these maps, for example, there were, from I would say 90% of the maps that I'm showing here, nobody was asking me to make them. I just really enjoy because nobody's asking me to make them, I still have the need to make them. I will make them on the side, or I'll find a reason to squeeze it into work. And so everybody's work is different, right? I mean, it might not work out for people um to sort of, I don't know,
Yeah,
there just might not be enough time in the day for someone to carve out time to do this, or for their employer to really support it. But you know
I love the message here. Again, not to this is not to flatter you, but the word that springs to mind is, this is evidence of being a virtuoso or showing true dedication, and deriving real meaning, personally from this discipline. So I really appreciate the display that you've put on from that perspective. Another thing that springs to mind is it would be nice somehow if the discipline, the clients, and the software that we used made it especially easy to produce beautiful work. At the moment, I mean, maybe it's just how I've engaged with the profession, but I feel that the software especially could do with some improvement to tilt things in favor of beauty by default.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think there are advancements in that in software, in a lot of different software, towards that. Just like not not to do a shameless plug or anything,
Go for
but
it.
the product that I
Please
do
save
work
us.
on is specifically for people who are looking for that. So because we can connect mapping to the Adobe Illustrator, which is a huge graphic design program, and that is exactly what it exists for. That sort of brings you know spatially accurate map data to the graphic design world and makes it a lot easier for those folks who already understand graphic design. But for folks who maybe don't have the time to sit back and like say, you know, font testing or sort of like go through the motions of what it takes to make a beautiful map. Software doesn't always make those choices as straightforward or easily. Um, and it's kind of because, I mean, I don't know why, but there's all of that function behind a map, behind the GS side of maps, right? Like there's analysis, there's basically people aren't going to make a map sometimes so that people can see it. They're not even going to maybe even take it out of the software. They're just going to use it to analyze and solve a problem. So yeah, I think it's just so complicated.
You're right. And that'd be interesting to quantify actually how much of spatial outputs really are cartographic, if you like, in nature. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that sprung to mind is like I wonder actually if someone must have again tried to quantify this, the competitive advantage to an organization that really nails beautiful maps by default and uses that to attract clients.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be a fun project to try to understand.
Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate these reflections. Yeah, I hope this episode generates a bit of discussion. Yeah, I feel like there's not enough discussion about it, and again, maybe it's just the way that I've engaged often. I'm giving the impression that all of my maps are these slapdash things, but really, it feels common, especially in the engineering consultancy context, that the map output is a very dry technical thing. There's no space for imagination. And if the presentation was as though it came out of AutoCAD, it would be satisfactory. So,
Right. Do you think I have a question for you then? And
yeah.
I've always been curious about this. Do you feel like if someone took that AutoCAD, not what people call cartographic map, although we can put a pin in that and discuss it in a moment. But do you feel like if someone had taken it to the next level of beauty, it would be taken as seriously? Because sometimes, well, let me let
I
you
was
answer
about to
first.
say the same thing. I was about to say something. Keep going. Yeah, round out the point because.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I feel that because oftentimes I'll be the cartographer that swoops in at the last minute and people just treat it as though it's just putting makeup on somebody and then they're ready for the stage. Um, But it's so much more than that. But
to me, no, I completely agree, and there is this sense perhaps that we must please a somewhat cynical crowd, but I think, pardon me for using straightforward language, that I think that's rubbish. I think if you do, for starters, if you make a beautiful map, you show that you've gone the extra mile. You show that you care. There's a whole bunch of other signals that you're sending to your client and future clients, that this is a staff member in an organization that cares. So there's all sorts of positive signaling that happens there. But I think genuinely, actually, there's additional understanding and memory that the recall for the content of a map, I suspect, and I'd love to, there must be some psychology research about this, should be higher where it's pleasing to the eye. I would hope so, anyway.
yes, or I mean, and pleasing to the eye in cartography oftentimes leads to just more legible. And so for that reason, yes, there is, retention of data on the map reader when a cartographer has made it, look quote unquote beautiful. But it does feel like sometimes, this is just a feeling, so this isn't, I don't have any evidence to back this up other than just anecdotally, that when a map goes from that sort of scientifically unpolished look to something that someone has taken the time to beautify, people interpret the change between before and after to a loss of scientific information and more of like a map for a general audience. And so I think that that's why a lot of times people can get away with, and totally should get away with, not adding that sort of quote unquote cartographic element.
And I completely sympathize. I mean, because my whole career since 2011, I've been, the pipeline design engineer, the road engineer. We're all essentially in the service of some design engineer who is a very often, and nothing against my wonderful, astute engineering colleagues, but at least their reputation is one of exactitude. And yeah, at the expense, or you wouldn't want to come across in that context as having of putting frivolities above, of taking a frivolous approach, to delivery.
Yes. I love how you say it too. You say it in such a clear way because probably you're in the industry. But yeah, me as sort of the outsider who would be brought in after the fact and then say, okay, let's make this for a general audience and do these things to the map. Um, that's how I always, not always, but that's how I sometimes feel the map is now interpreted, as though it lost some of its scienciness, but now it's can be digestible to a broader audience.
Yeah, but I think, because my first degree was actually psychology, so I have a tendency to just check the literature, and a habit to, I like to, I'm absolutely certain that there would have been tens of studies about perception, recall, just general understanding differences under different conditions, with different, what can I say, interventions is the term that they would use in setting up an experiment. With cartography as stimuli. I would love to review that evidence and use it to challenge this, this position, that it is a frivolity merely to make something beautiful. I suspect that is wrong.
I mean, I'm in full agreement with you. And I wish I had studies listed before me, but I know that Penn State has historically done a lot of research on this topic.
Yeah.
So, but I wish I could actually name people and works right now, but I can't.
No, that's all good. That's an institution to. I'll go. That'll help with my Google Scholar searches.
Yeah, but I mean, so I wanted to just return to something that I put a pin in a while ago, and that is that cartography is sort of the act of taking that sciencey map and then making it look pretty. I think of every single step along the way as cartography, and I think only with the advent of software have we started, dividing these into data collection, database management, analysis, and then, cartography. It's all map making, right? And in my opinion, all of that person who's collecting the data, their biases matter to the end product. Their methods, their tools they use, it's all part of the same act. So I don't really separate myself from excuse me, from all of that. So when people are like talk about cartography as though it's this other thing, I know what they're saying, but I don't necessarily, it doesn't really mesh with my experiences.
So your point is, for successful, beautiful cartography, aim for a integrated approach with a beautiful output in mind from the beginning. Or that every act along the way upstream of the output is in service of making it easy to produce a beautiful output.
I mean, I'd go so far as to remove beauty out of the entire equation.
I keep using that word.
No, I mean,
because I'm looking at this beautiful shaded relief on the screen.
No, so I like how you said it, but so my interpretation of the entire act of contextualizing the space that we live, with graphics, and with analysis and with storytelling, what we tell ourselves these analyses mean. That to me is all the big act, and I'm not saying act as if it's a charade, but the action, that we're participating in, and the act of making it beautiful is what today we're calling cartography. So, I guess what I like to think of mapping, beauty aside, is this human act of telling ourselves and everybody else what's important in space, who's important in space, who, unfortunately, we oftentimes tell who's not important by leaving stories off the map, or telling, dark stories of certain places or whatever. So I just think of mapping very like as this responsibility of how we present the world spatially. That's kind of how I think of cartography. And part of it is, I don't know, let me just close this and go to any random map. I don't know. Like here's I'm just clicking anything. But I don't know. I'm not picking up, I'm not gonna find one just off the click of a button. But oh, not that one. Sorry. But yeah, I think I kind of lost my train of thought when I was trying to find a map that fit what I was trying to say.
I like the message that there is a degree of responsibility in what we do. And this is another thing. I mean, I keep coming back to my grumbling about the engineering context that I work in. I feel like we, at least if I'm, for the given fiber optic route that I am assisting the design of, I can get lost in the details. And, that 480 kilometer stretch in the Australian outback that I spent, 3 months, studying in detail, isn't the whole world. And there's, I don't know if that contributes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I as you know, you can't put every single thing that exists in a space that you're mapping on the map itself. I mean,
Yeah,
otherwise it would be
right.
illegible.
There's an
But if
editorial decision.
it's everything is an editorial decision, and that's from the data that you collect and the analysis
Mm,
you decide to make, and which sort of algorithm you decide or
hmm.
whatever. Cartography, or the colors and the fonts and the placement of the labels and all of that, that is no different. um, that's no different than every other step along the way. But also, the reduction of cartography to just like font choice and colors and making things look beautiful, um, it's just so much more scientific than that.
Mm,
Like you were saying, um, there's evidence for what makes a map more legible, which is the entire point of a
yeah.
map. Yeah, so
What one message that's coming through for me there is that there are judgments or decisions about what to present. And the distinction that I understand you're making is that it's not only when you're deciding how to present it all in a cartographic product, but decisions about what to rule in and rule out happen from the very beginning, even when you're deciding which data sets to collect and which ones not. Is that part of your point?
that's a lot of it. Yes. Yeah. And well
Okay.
said.
Okay. Right. Just about other learnings here from all of the American guests that are coming on. I see you using Behance, and this is a portfolio.
Oh, yes. So this is Adobe's online portfolio, and so sometimes I add what I'm working on to these.
Awesome. I think I should start one.
You should. It's great. Yeah, and you can find inspiration. I like to use a lot of graphic design as inspiration for my maps, so there's a lot of great inspiration on Behance.
Great, cool. I guess we're basically at time. Can I ask one provocative question?
Sure.
So I could be wrong. I'm a foreigner. I'm not in America, but it looks like there's the beginnings of a high-speed rail network starting to emerge in the US. Is there assistance to truly the emergence of a high-speed rail backbone for the country that could be rendered by beautiful maps?
Yes. Do you mean as a public campaign?
Yeah, how could you propel the
Oh,
emergence
yeah.
of an awesome nationwide high-speed rail network through beautiful maps?
Well, so I'm already a believer in having a high speed trail or high speed rail. So but I would say, like, if someone were to hire me, I would probably show how well this could connect. A lot of times families in the summer will go on cross country road trips, showing like highlights in the country of where you might visit along the rail, um, showing commute times, showing the amount of cars that would be removed from the freeway, reduction in CO2, all of these things. So adding some data viz to these maps. Um, and I haven't seen a lot of these types of maps, but you mentioned Stamen a while ago.
Yeah.
Here in Bellingham, Washington, where I live. Alan McConkey also lives here. He is lead cartographer of Stamen, and he is
Wow.
very, very active in this whole high-speed rail idea for the part of the country that I live in. I'd be curious to know if you knew of any maps.
So I don't, but I really love the idea of us as a discipline adding momentum to the emergence of this for the US.
Yeah, I like that idea too. I'd be down.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe we can try and generate some interest on Bluesky as well on other networks and see what we can do.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be so fun. sort of a
Awesome.
grassroots effort.
I mean, I have other ideas too, because obviously we need to do a nationwide multi-criteria analysis that, takes all of the cities that, are above a certain population density and, models a minimum spanning tree between them all across the 50 constraints that matter. I think it would be an amazing, inspiring sort of public outreach sort of a project, doing GIS in public, to sort of stand up a first pass of what the network could look like.
Yeah, that would be so fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's get on with it.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. I love your line of questioning. It made it very interesting. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate the stimulus too, Sarah. Thanks very much.